Welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome to the channel. Let's discuss why you should be paranoid about documenting the condition of your car before handing anyone the keys. Then we'll cover the simple actions that you can take to make sure that you're not stuck paying a bill for thousands of dollars of damage that could be caused to one of your vehicles. So this is the story about how a local tire shop caused, I'll just say, very extensive damage to my 2012 Porsche Cayenne. But first, let's back up a second. So about 5 years ago at this point, I purchased my 2012 Porsche Cayenne as a certified pre-owned vehicle. I got it from the local Porsche dealership. It had a bumper-to-bumper 2-year unlimited mile warranty, and I paid $20,400 out the door for that vehicle. It had about 62,000 miles at the time, and even though this was in the craziness of COVID car pricing, I thought it was an absolute steal for the deal that I got. But even so, $20,000, that is a lot of money to me. It's a lot now, and it was especially a lot to me about 5 years ago. And that's despite being a massive car guy and spending probably a disproportionate amount of my income strictly on vehicles, which I probably don't need. But that said, I do take a lot of pride in the vehicles that I have. It's not just transportation to me, it is also a hobby. I enjoy driving, I enjoy keeping them maintained and in great condition, and it's one of those things that I get enjoyment out of looking at my vehicles and thinking, wow, this is in great condition and it's amazingly clean despite the fact that it might be, in this case, 13 years old. So in a way, it is also kind of like my version of art. It's something that I really appreciate, and as a result of that, I try to take the absolute best care of these things as I can. But that does carry with it a certain degree of paranoia. And what I'm going to say next, I already realize this is going to sound very extreme to downright insane to a lot of people who are not car people. I fully realize that and I accept it. But the caveat is I do this for a reason, and in this particular case, that reason saved me literally thousands of dollars. I take video evidence of my vehicles and the condition that they are in 3 certain circumstances. If I either 1, have to hand over the keys to somebody, be it a shop or a detailer. Number 2, if I'm leaving it anywhere for an extended period of time that I'm worried about it getting damaged. So for example, at a bus station or in an airport parking lot. Or number 3, if I generally think it's at high risk of being damaged. Now the 2 most common cases of that are if people are parked very close to me on city streets, or if it's parked on the road and it is a very high traffic area and I'm worried about someone hitting it. And at this point, I've been doing this for probably around 10 years. And the reason I really started doing this is because I had a car that was victim to 2 separate hit and runs in a couple month time span. So in one instance, someone backed into my front bumper and cracked the front bumper. In another instance, they completely sideswiped my rear bumper, they broke a bunch of the clips, and they completely took off a lot of the paint. And in fact, even though that second one happened, in my workplace parking lot, directly under a security camera, I took this info to the local police and they did absolutely nothing. Now, I don't think they did it intentionally, but the fact is they still hit my vehicle and I wanted it repaired to how it was prior to them running into it. So I had the full description of that vehicle. Like I said, this was also at my work, so later in the week I was able to find it in a different area of the parking, and I noticed this black car had a nice blue stripe down the side, which perfectly matched the paint missing from my bumper. That stripe also happened to be at the same height off the ground as the section of paint that was missing from my bumper, so you could probably say it was a pretty good match. So I took all of this evidence and I took the photos after the fact, I provided them all to the police, and they said that this was all not enough evidence to do anything beyond filing a police report so that I could get reimbursed through my insurance. Except for a couple problems. Number 1, if I have a police report, it automatically gets reported to my insurance goes up regardless of whether or not I really make the claim. Number 2, the damage value on that car for the bumper and then the respray would have been less than my deductible, meaning that my insurance wouldn't have actually covered anything, and I would have had to pay out of pocket on top of my rates going up. So the police report would have provided legitimately 0 value to me. But unfortunately, I did not have a photo of my car undamaged next to that car prior to that incident happening that would have proved at a certain point in time they had no damage and I had no damage, and neither of us had a stripe of the other car's color all of a sudden. And around the same time that this happened, I had a good friend who had a 2008 Audi RS4. Even 10 years ago, that was a pretty rare car and all the parts for it were extremely hard to get. He took this car to a tire shop. When he went to go pick it up, he noticed all 4 wheels were heavily scuffed and chipped. When he was telling me about this though, he said the only thing that really saved him is that he took close-up photos of all 4 wheels prior to dropping off the car at the shop. And pretty much that is the only thing that saved him and forced the shop to have to pay for the damage that they caused. And taking those photos was really the cheapest and easiest form of insurance. Because in these scenarios, you're not worried about the people who are going to do the right thing and fess up and pay for the damage. damage. The unfortunate reality in my experience is that most businesses are going to try to skirt the cost and make some claim that the damage was already there. So a lot of them, unfortunately, will try to fight you tooth and nail to avoid having to pay. So for me, having all these things happen around the same time, I decided that in my case, I would rather be diligent about capturing a photo or some video documentation to prove my car's condition, and do so proactively, or some may call it being paranoid, because for me, that is worth the peace of mind to prevent other people from damaging my property and not being able to hold them accountable. So for years, that's what I've done. If I'm parallel parked in the city and I notice the car in front of me is really close and there's a chance that they're going to back into me, as has happened to me before, I'll do a walk around in my car, I'll show my bumper in its undamaged condition, I will show the condition of their bumper, and I will get their license plate in the video as well to show that anything that's new to either of our cars would have been caused by that incident. Similarly, if I drop the car off at a shop, I'm not only going to document the condition, I'm also going to document the odometer reading to make sure they never took it on a joyride. At this point, I've just heard and personally witnessed too many horror stories that it's not really worth the risk for me. Because especially as a car guy, right, I tend to have things that are either more rare or faster or more expensive, and unfortunately, those are the same types of vehicles that are more likely to be taken on an unexpected joyride. If you hand a technician the keys to a Toyota Camry or a Corvette and give them free reign, they're probably going to take the Corvette because ultimately it is more exciting. But on the other side of this, if those vehicles do get damaged, the more exciting or faster vehicles, typically parts are more expensive, they might be harder to actually get, and as a result of that, repairs are often a lot more costly. Which takes us to this incident. The next clip that I'm about to show you is going to seem very mundane, but this short clip is the only reason that I didn't have to pay for thousands of dollars of damage that a shop caused to my car out of my own pocket. Now, I want to say that I am not going to name this shop. First and foremost, at this point, they've paid for the repairs, they have made it right for this incident. But the point stands that this same thing could pretty much happen to anyone at any shop you go to, because even with this walk-around video showing my car completely undamaged with their shop in the background in their parking lot, it was an uphill battle for more than 2 months, which given the circumstances was absolutely insane. So here's the backstory. This place is a tire shop. Installing tires is pretty much the only thing they do. That's it. So about 1.5 years into me owning my Cayenne, the all-season tires were starting to get a little bit lower on tread. I live in the northern US. We do get a lot of snow here in the winters, so I decided it was time for me to get a designated set of winter tires. So I ordered the tires through the shop, and as part of the deal, it comes with free installation. However, what they don't tell you ahead of time is that the install is subject to their availability. So I originally ordered these tires in either late October or early November. I did it way ahead of when I needed them. They were probably delivered to the shop about 1 to 2 weeks later, and then I spent the next several weeks repeatedly calling the shop and trying to get something scheduled, but every single time I called, they kept making excuses about how they were booked out for more than a month. They couldn't do bookings any farther out than that because of how their system was set up. It was just excuse after excuse for a couple of weeks, and then I finally got an appointment in mid-December after literally weeks of calling them on an almost daily basis. Then the morning of the appointment comes, I get a message from them saying somebody called out, my appointment is canceled. They don't offer me another time to come in. They don't just say it's delayed. They literally say I have to restart the entire scheduling process to find an appointment. Now, in trying to find a solution, I found out that I was able to go pick up the tires and then I could take them to another shop to get installed, but then I would have to pay for that install out of pocket. It would have been about $120 on the low end, realistically probably closer to $150. But the only reason that I even purchased them from this facility was because installation was supposed to be included. Because if it wasn't, they would no longer have been the cheapest option, and quite frankly, I would have gotten the tires somewhere else. But at this point, it had also been more than 30 days since the tires were ordered and delivered, meaning that it was beyond the return window, so that was also not an option. So like I said, they make zero accommodations to reschedule in a reasonable time frame. They said their next appointment was the first week of January, which was about 3 weeks later at that point. So that appointment finally arrives, and you guessed it, they cancel again on the morning of. I am, understandably at this point, not exactly thrilled. It's been more than 2 months since I purchased the tires. Everything about the situation is waving red flags, and at this point I probably should have trusted my gut. However, I am quite stubborn and very persistent, so out of principle, I wanted them to do the install because it should have been included. So I finally get my third appointment booked 2 more weeks out in the middle of January. Now, I show up for that appointment and I film that clip that I showed you earlier, which has the 3 critical elements in it. Number 1, condition of the vehicle, including in this case close-ups of the wheels, because that is what the shop was going to be working on. Number 2, the odometer reading proving the exact mileage of the car when it was in that condition, because if you don't include that, somebody can argue that some mileage has elapsed or that something happened when you were driving it elsewhere. Which brings us to number 3, the proof that it was actually at that shop when that video was taken, and I typically do this by either turning the camera either to their building or to a sign that they have out front, which I did do in the original video, but I cut it out for this video because, like I said, I'm not trying to out them. They have made it right at this point. It's best to have all 3 of these elements in a single take with no cuts. So that's really the only way to conclusively prove the condition of the car versus when you were there and the mileage that it was at, i.e. the exact time and place that you handed over the keys and relinquished control to the shop. Now, the date, time, and in some cases GPS data are also often included in cell phone videos, so that is also great supporting evidence. But the other major item to note is to watch for red flags and trust your instincts, because if I had just done that and I had gone to another shop after the 2 canceled appointments, ultimately it would have saved me a lot of problems and a lot of time in the long run. But back to that appointment in mid-January. I arrive, I capture that video with the key elements, I go in, and then I hand over my keys after checking in. And as I go in, there are only 2 employees in this shop. They are running both the counter and doing the tire services. It is a small operation. But as I'm checking in, that is when the next red flag occurs. As part of the check-in process, you have to tell them the make and the model of the car, which is pretty standard. But the second I do that, the employee behind the counter gets really visibly nervous all of a sudden. And he actually says, "Oh, it's a Porsche?" And then proceeds to make several comments directly in front of me about how they're very expensive, despite the fact that I bought this car with a warranty for $20,000. But this guy is visibly uneasy. It is a huge red flag, but at this point, we're in the middle of winter, right? We are approaching 3 months since I originally purchased the tires, and there was an impending snowstorm that was going to hit us in the next couple of days. So ultimately, I really needed these tires on that car. But honestly, if at that point the employee had said to me, "Hey, we're worried about installing the tires on your car, we don't have the right equipment for your wheels, or there's a risk that will damage XYZ because of the way that our shop is set up," would I have been frustrated in that moment? Yes, absolutely. But ultimately, I do not want my vehicle damaged. But if they had said that up front, I at least would have had a mutual understanding, and we could have probably had some sort of a negotiation where I got some money refunded off of the price of the tires due to the wait time so that I could go get them installed somewhere else. Would it have frustrated me in the moment? Yes, but ultimately I would have been totally fine with that as a resolution. Because if they are that uneasy about doing it, there is a higher risk of damage, and I should have listened to my gut because that was a huge red flag. But naturally, they don't say anything to that effect. They take my keys and I go to the waiting area, and I'm waiting for a period of time that is, we'll just say, long enough that any other shop would have had not only my car done, but probably the 3 after it done as well. Then they finally bring my car into the garage bay, and then within minutes of that, the employee comes walking out to the waiting area and says, "Hey, we noticed some damage on your rocker panel. We want you to take a look. It was already there, but we don't want to do or touch anything unless you're okay with that and that you're aware that it's there." The rocker panels on this car have a kind of plastic cover to them. I'm thinking at this point it's probably scratched or something. So they take me out to the car, car, it is sitting on the lift, and then what I see is this, a 4 to 5 inch gash completely through the rocker panel with a large scratch leading up to it. And wouldn't you notice, it happens to be directly in front of where the swinging arm of the lift would make contact if they weren't being careful while getting the car set up. And I mean literally directly above that lift point. And at this point, their behavior shifts to full out sketchy. They were being super avoidant of the issue. They refused to say that they did anything despite me saying that I have a video before the car went in. They absolutely refused to let me speak to any manager at the store because there wasn't one actually in the shop at that time. Supposedly on the other side of the store where they had the rest of the storefront, there was a manager in there, but suddenly they couldn't be reached or they were unavailable and out of the building at that time. They also kept saying things like, oh, this guy wouldn't have done it. He's been doing this job for 30 years. He would never do something like this. He's really detailed. He wouldn't miss that. He's really good at this job. There's absolutely no way that this was caused by him. So at that moment in time, I knew precisely two things. Number one, they were not going to admit any fault in that moment or allow me to speak to literally any sort of manager or owner that could actually resolve this situation. Which ultimately means they're not going to have documentation of it on their end while I am there, and that I'm ultimately not going to be able to get this resolved that day either way. And the second thing I knew is that it was still 3 months after I ordered my tires, after 2 canceled appointments, and that there was still an impending snowstorm in the next couple of days. So the damage is already done, right? So leaving with the car damaged and also still not having the snow tires installed, not an option. So that becomes my big focus, right? The damage is going to be resolved later. Let's just get these tires on the car. At that time, I pretty much used every de-escalation tactic that I could. I tried to make it seem like it wasn't a big deal, that I didn't blame them either way, because ultimately my car is still on their lift. I don't want them to mess up the mounting and balancing of the tires, and I don't want them to break anything else. So that's now priority number one. Get the work done, hope it's correct, get my car back. Luckily, I finally get this de-escalated enough that I can convince them that they can continue, and by the time they actually take the car off the lift and pull it outside, by the time everything is said and done, it is dark out. Now for reference, my appointment was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. It is mid-January in the northeast of the US. The sun at that time of the year fully sets between 5 and 5:30 p.m. They pulled the car out of the garage just after 7:30 p.m. At this point, it's nighttime. It took them more than 3 hours to install 4 tires after a 3-month wait. But even though it was that dark out, it was not even a challenge for me to see that the wheels did not look right. Unfortunately, it was so dark that I actually couldn't get a good, clear, detailed video of the damage while it was still in their lot. That would have been ideal in this situation, especially because I could show the odometer had no other mileage on it, so it would have had to occur while the car was there. So instead, I do the next best thing. I drive directly home. I don't make any stops whatsoever. And the very next morning, the very first thing I do is go out and film this video. These wheels have 10 spokes each, and when I look close in person, I noticed that almost every single spoke on every single wheel had some form of paint chips, scratches, dents, scuffs, or material taken off of the face of them on every single wheel. So remember earlier when the employees said that they were really detail-oriented and they would never cause damage like this because they've been doing it for so long? Well, here is my counter to that argument. Look at the quality of their work. Not only did they damage absolutely everything, they didn't even take the few seconds to wipe off off all the tire mounting grease that they slathered around the entire wheel. This is by far the laziest, sloppiest, most downright pathetic work I have ever seen come out of an actual shop. They had zero ownership of it, they had zero pride of their work, they didn't even have a faint attempt at putting an effort of having a little bit of a smear where they might have tried to wipe up some of the grease. There was literally nothing that said that they tried it all when doing this changeover. Which brings us to perhaps the craziest part of this story. Despite the marks on all of these wheels being in roughly the same area, at the same depth, on both sides of the car, and despite all of these clearly resembling the damage that would result from a tire mounting machine, it still took months to get this damage resolved, despite the fact that I had that very clear video from before I dropped off the car. Here is the total sum of damages they caused. So first and foremost, the rocker panel itself. At the time, that was about a $350 part plus 1.5 hours of labor to install it. At the time, the shops near me were charging $225 an hour for that work, so that would have been another $337.50 in labor. Next, let's go on to the wheels. All four of them had some pretty significant surface damage, and replacement OEM wheels at the time were about $700 each. That is $2,800 in total, plus the cost of swapping over the TPMS sensors and the tires at another independent shop, because let's be real, I would not put them anywhere within a 5-mile radius of that place again. The sensor and tire change would cost about another $200 total. And they also managed to crack one of the plastic underbody panels as well. Fortunately, I was actually filming myself do an oil change a couple weeks before that in the garage, and I actually captured that body panel was completely undamaged. But unfortunately, I did not have an odometer reading in that clip because I was underneath the car, which means I couldn't prove that there wasn't a significant lapse of time or significant miles between when the damage was discovered versus when I proved that it wasn't damaged. But that plastic under tray was $335 plus $112.50 for a half hour of labor of installation. Then I would still need a vehicle to get to work while my vehicle was being repaired, so I estimated a rental car for 2 days while the work was being completed at a cost of about $60 a day, which, to be clear, is not even necessarily an equivalent mid-size SUV. That was for a compact SUV, which is the smallest thing that I could get away with for what I needed for my job. But adding all this up, that means it would have been $4,255 to repair the damage that they had caused, and most of that was strictly the cost of the parts. Now personally, I try to keep an emergency fund, but I don't keep $4,000 on hand in case somebody else happens to damage my vehicles carelessly. However, I am still a reasonable person, right? So I looked up a local place that could refinish the wheels instead of fully replacing them, but because of the amount of prep work and the amount of time for the paint to dry afterwards, they would have needed the car for some additional time. So it would have cost $1,000 total for the refinishing, but I also would have needed the rental car for an additional 2 days, so an extra $120. And like I said before, even though I had proof that the underbody panel was not damaged before, I didn't have the odometer reading and a timestamp, so I couldn't prove the exact timing of the events of when that was damaged. So that means the cheapest repair bill, by not doing the underbody damage and by only getting the wheels refinished instead of replaced, would be just shy of $2,000 at $1,927.50. Armed with these very clear videos of before and after I was at the shop, I contacted the business every single day and was given an excuse for most of the days for why those managers were not available. I emailed their office, I called their corporate office, I provided the before and after videos in full with the odometer and the timestamps, and I also provided a screenshot of Google Maps that showed that the exact increase of my odometer reading was the exact distance from their shop directly to my house. And other than about 1.5 miles, the entirety of that trip was on the highway, which means there was no opportunity during that drive for my wheels to get damaged. And after 3 straight weeks of calling at least once per day, this is the response that I received. It was a single voicemail that stated, "We've checked the security cameras and concluded that the technicians did not cause any of the damages you claimed. But for very obvious reasons, I wanted to see this video for myself to verify that their technique of evaluating was correct." But when I pressed them more, not only did they not provide me any copy of the footage that they had, I also offered to go on site so that they didn't have to send send me an independent copy if they were worried about security concerns, and then I could review it with them in person just to verify. But of course, this request was completely unreasonable, so they refused. What I was able to pry out of them, though, was that they had a single low-resolution security camera placed on the very top corner of their high bay garage. So I went back to their facility, I physically looked at the placement and the type of camera that they had, and let's just say the security system they had was relatively dated. Regardless, they still could conclusively claim that this low-res mystery ghost footage shot from the far side of a high bay garage somehow proved that they were free of fault, in direct contradiction to my high-resolution, close-range footage with timestamp directly before I handed them the keys with their shop in the background. Well, we investigated ourselves, and we want to let you know that we didn't do anything wrong. No, we can't provide you any of the evidence or provide any details to what or how we evaluated this, but just trust us. We're correct. Isn't that just fascinating? In total, it took me 2.5 months of me applying pressure to the right areas on an almost daily basis before they finally agreed to pay for the full repairs at a little bit less than $2,000. Because at that point, the other option I gave them was to explain their BS story to the police, who would hopefully obtain a search warrant, show that their video was garbage and didn't actually prove anything, and then they would have the honor of paying the claim in full, plus any attorney fees from the impending lawsuit that I was going to file. And I want to make this clear, I have zero desire to ever have to do anything like that through our legal system. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to have to deal with the long waits of having it go through everything. To be honest, I think it's ridiculous and it's kind of a joke. The fact that it even has to go to that point is insane to me. And in the grand scheme of things, for a business of that size with a corporate backing, $2,000 is absolutely insignificant. Even if I went for the full value of replacing the wheels at about $4,300 total, that still would have been a drop in the bucket for a company of this size. And collectively, over the span of months of dealing with this, they probably spent more money trying to avoid paying this than the absolute maximum amount that they would have had to pay out had they just covered everything up front. And that is despite the fact that they are actually insured for incidents like this. This was ultimately paid out through their insurance company. Yet for some reason, they decided to make this as obnoxious as humanly possible and drag it out for literally months. And here's the thing, right? It was this difficult and this time-consuming of a process, despite the fact that I had that much very clear photo and video evidence that I was able to provide. Had I not captured that initial video, which took me maybe a minute total, I can pretty much guarantee you that I would have seen $0 from them. And my choices would have been either, number one, pay thousands of dollars out of pocket to have this repaired, or file it through my insurance and have my insurance rates go through the roof for no reason, or number two, leave this nice 5-inch hole on the bottom of my rocker panel, significantly reduce the value of my vehicle, and have it collect all of the delicious salt and snow from the winter roads here, creating a nice, beautiful slurry of rust down the entire frame of my car. And this same thing could happen to you. So believe me, I fully appreciate that it probably comes off as next level paranoia to take all these videos. But ask yourself, genuinely, is it worth a minute of my time to avoid potentially having to pay for thousands of dollars of damage that somebody else caused to my vehicle, or to have to live with that damage and look at it every day and also have it decrease the value of my car? Because while this shop did finally, and albeit very reluctantly, make this right, it was still a long, extremely frustrating uphill battle, and unfortunately, from what I've seen, a lot of other shops would have handled it the exact same way. Something like this can ultimately happen to literally anyone, anywhere, at any time. But taking that quick video with the 3 key elements of having the condition of the car, the odometer reading, and the proof that it was in a specific place at a specific time, such as outside of a shop or parked next to another car that is dangerously close, that could legitimately be the only difference between being able to hold someone accountable for damaging your property versus having to pay for all the damage yourself. Taking those quick, easy steps ultimately saved me thousands of dollars on this incident alone, and it can do the exact same thing for you. And with that, thank you for watching.